Episode 11: Politics, Leadership, and the Workplace. Can you really separate them? Welcome to HR Decoded, where we uncomplicate the people problems breaking your business. I'm your host, Annika Hall, fractional COO and People Ops Strategist. In today's episode, might hit a little deeper than usual. We're talking about politics, but not in the way you think. This isn't a debate about left versus right. It's about the very real and very messy intersection between leadership and politics. And if you're in any leadership role, whether you're a founder, a manager, or an HR professional, it's time to stop pretending these worlds don't collide. So a few weeks ago, I published an article called "If You Can't Separate Politics from Your HR Role, You Might Be in the Wrong Career." If you want to read it, you can view it on my website at www.hrdecoded.pro, LinkedIn, or Medium. And as you can imagine, the reactions came in hot. Some people thanked me for finally saying what they've been thinking. Others accused me of being too neutral, too corporate, too dismissive of the real issues. But let me back up and give you some more context on why I wrote the article to begin with. So it started with SHRM announcing that President Biden would be the keynote speaker at this year's conference. For those of you not in HR, SHRM is the Society for Human Resources Management and is basically the industry's largest, most visible HR association. And after their announcement, what followed was this explosion of comments all over their social media accounts from very senior HR professionals, some of which were supportive, but others were downright unhinged. And it was shocking considering we could all see who they were and where they were. These were not your average, anonymous keyboard warriors. This was a very public display by quote unquote respected corporate professionals in charge of peopling. And I was reading through the comments, and one really stuck out to me. A person straight out posted, "Imagine those folks who left horrible comments as your HR rep." And my first reaction was, yikes. This is literally when HR becomes an HR nightmare. But anyway, over the last few weeks, I have been thinking about it, and I realized that this isn't just about HR professionals. This is about leadership across the board. It really doesn't matter if you're a founder, a team lead, or a manager, or a people ops professional. People are still operating under this, fantasy that they can be neutral when things get hard. But it's a conversation that needs to be had, and it needs to be uncomfortable. So let me walk you through a few of the political, cultural, and human leadership landmines I've had to navigate in organizations throughout my career. Let's go all the way back to 2010. There was acknowledging gender identity policies and transgender employee rights in the workplace. In 2012, there was navigating the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which is also known as the DACA program. In 2016, we had to manage fear among international and Muslim employees during the travel bans. In 2017, I had to lead harassment policy overhauls for cultural repairs due to the Me Too movement. In 2019, the Crown Act in California came into play that protected race-based hair discrimination. In 2020, we all had to balance remote work, safety, mental health, and in the chaos of COVID-19. While, mind you, I was dealing with leaders on both ends of the to wear a mask or not to wear a mask debate. Also in 2020, there was supporting Black employees through grief and calls for racial justice while executives debated whether or not to release a statement. Then in 2021, we navigated assisting employees in and within, with family in Ukraine and living in the Ukraine as, my clients dismissed global conflict as not being operationally relevant. And here we are in 2025, living through and witnessing things like DEI programs being gutted amid, backlash, while trust is eroding in leaders and employees are calling out their companies for performative inclusion. And then we have the ICE raids that are happening all over the country, leading to discussions on whether to continue hiring employees on visas because they are potentially at risk of having their employment disrupted. And it's only July. We still have 5 more months to go. And let me tell you, as I have worked through every one of these issues, there is a similar pattern. The people affected are told to keep it professional, while the people in power are allowed to disengage entirely. But it's 2025. We're leading teams that are more politically aware, more globally connected, and more emotionally expressive than ever before. And that means leaders at every level are being pulled into political waters, whether they're ready or not. So I want to unpack what I really mean when I say separate politics from your role and why it matters now more than ever. So let's start with a hard truth. Workplaces aren't apolitical, but leaders have to be emotionally neutral. I've worked with founders on both sides of the aisle. I've sat in executive rooms where one leader is quoting Fox News and another is wearing a Love is Love hoodie. And guess what? It's my job to serve the business, not my personal feelings. That doesn't make me disloyal to my identity, it makes me disciplined in my role. I don't have to pretend the world isn't burning, but you do have to be able to lead all kinds of people, including people who don't see the world the way you do. That's the real work, that's the job you signed up for. And the problem isn't caring or not. The problem is when you're intentionally or unintentionally weaponizing your beliefs in your leadership role. Years ago, I worked with a senior executive who described himself as non political, someone who didn't want to bring divisive issues into the workplace. At face value, that sounds reasonable, maybe even admirable. But then one day, an employee showed up wearing a simple pride t shirt, not profane, not policy violating, not disruptive in any way. That same executive pulled me aside and said, "It's too political. We need to ask them to change." I asked why, and he replied, some people don't agree with that lifestyle. We can't risk upsetting clients." Let me pause you there. A shirt supporting the LGBTQ plus rights was considered too political, but asking someone to hide their identity or quietly erase it in the name of customer comfort, that was perfectly acceptable. Let me be clear, that's not neutrality. That's weaponized discomfort. What he really meant was, this challenges my worldview, so I'm labeling it a threat. And that's the leadership trap so many fall into on both sides of the aisles. I've seen issues in reverse where a star employee who was deemed too conservative was being denied a promotion. So when you're in a position of power, your personal beliefs don't just shape your own behavior, they shape policy, they shape precedent, they shape what's rewarded, what's punished, what people feel safe expressing at work. Culture is built on these quiet decisions, the ones that seem small in the moment, but ripple through everything. And when you dismiss something as too political simply because it makes you uncomfortable, you're not creating neutrality, you're creating fear. Leadership isn't about pretending you don't have beliefs. It's about having the self awareness not to let those beliefs harm, silence, or marginalize others. That's the responsibility, and that's the difference. You don't have to agree with someone's views, but you do have to treat them fairly. Because the minute you start gatekeeping opportunities based on belief, you become the problem. So, what does separating politics from leadership actually mean? Let's be clear. I'm not saying ignore injustice. I'm not saying tolerate hate. I'm not saying keep quiet when there's real harm happening. But I am saying this. As I said in my article, you are not the main character. The company is. As a leader, you don't get to make everything about you. That's not leadership, that's performance. Your job, my job, is to create structure, clarity, and psychological safety for people across the spectrum. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That means holding space for multiple truths, leading with emotional regulation, and being aware of when your personal agenda is linking into your leadership decisions. And again, I know it's hard. I'm telling you, over the last 20 years, I've had to bite my tongue many times, but I have a job to do. So what can you do differently? Here's what I tell my clients and what I practice myself. Number one, anchor your decisions in policy, not personal preference. You can care about the issue and follow company policy. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Number two, practice emotional regulation. Leadership is emotional labor. Learn to sit in discomfort without spiraling or over identifying with it. Number three, build structures that serve the business, not your politics. DEI programs, hiring practices, performance reviews, all of it should be built on fairness and function, not ideological alignment. Number four, get clear on your own boundaries. If you can't separate your values from your role, it's okay to step out of that role, but don't stay in it and sabotage the system. Number five, lead with curiosity, not control. You don't have to agree with your team, but you do need to understand them to lead them. And here's my final thoughts. Politics aren't going away. Neither is social tension, global conflict, or the emotional toll of leading humans in a complex world. But if you want to lead, not just perform leadership, you've got to be able to hold space for people who aren't carbon copies of you. That's where real culture lives. That's where trust is built. That's where we start to shift the workplace, not into a political stage, but into a space where people can actually work together, even when they vote differently. So I will go ahead and link the original article in the show notes if you want to give it a read. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on maybe some of your own stories from the workplace. Tell me what you've experienced and navigated through. But also, I hope this episode gave you something to reflect on, not just as a leader, but as a human. And if you want support building strong leadership systems that work across differences, visit my website at www.hrdecoded.pro to book a strategy call. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week for another episode of HR Decoded. Bye for now.